Hi, this is my behaviorist biography. I'm just going to share my screen here so you can see my slideshow. So the behaviorist that I chose is called Seung-Woo Kang. There's a picture of him. He's currently teaching and researching at Rutgers, and he's also chair of the Department of Applied Psychology there, teaches as an associate professor, and directs the ABA and autism programs. He's actively teaching and he contributes chapters to numerous books about ABA in particular. He has 2 studies that are not listed here that are currently in press, so he's continuing to research and publish. He's worked with human populations with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism in particular, and focuses on the changes that behaviorism can make in their lives. So he studied both children and adults. He's also the associate editor for the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and he serves on the board there. He has been practicing since 1993. He started as a clinical assistant professor at Northeastern before moving to the Kennedy Krieger Institute as a senior behavior analyst in the Department of Behavioral Psychology. And he also taught as an adjunct assistant professor of psychology for about 10 years at the University of Maryland and worked as an associate professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Here are some of the texts that he has contributed chapters towards. Before he moved to Rutgers, where he is at the moment, he chaired the Department of Health Psychology at the University of Missouri. And he's authored or co-authored about 91 publications. So we're going to have a look at the 5 publications that I outline in my paper. So the first one is called Behavioral Treatment of Self-Injury from 1964 to 2000. It was published in the American Journal on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and it's a quantitative analysis of studies of self-injurious behavior, SIB, in numerous journal databases and included all behaviorism treatments used during that time period. So one interesting finding was that the effectiveness of behavioral interventions didn't actually improve that much during this whole time period. The focus on treatment after SIB occurs was something that Kang and his co-authors noted. So instead of focusing on prevention, they instead look at treatment after the problem behavior occurs. SIBs are really hard to treat, and how effective differential reinforcement and extinction are depend on what functional assessments find out about the individual. How well punishment and non-reinforcement treatments work aren't actually changed that much by the findings of the functional assessments. So that was sort of one really big finding from this study. Some of the implications of this are that if we actually look at the function of the behavior, the assessment for the assessment, reinforcement is more likely to be selected as an effective treatment choice than punishment. It's really widespread, the influence of this study, because of the prevalence of intellectual disabilities. And since SIB is something that can contribute to an individual's death, if it could be prevented or eliminated by focusing on prevention, and by looking at function of behavior before selecting treatment, then we could save a lot of lives. The second text that I chose here is called Defining and Measuring Behavior. Kang is the principal author on this work, and it's a chapter in the Handbook of Applied Behavior Analysis. It outlines effectively defining and measuring a behavior. So accuracy, reliability, and validity are the cornerstones of effective ABA in this chapter. And the authors define the operational definition of a behavior, including the fact that topographical definitions are really important, since a behavior that is fitting in a social situation and that's inappropriate in that same situation can have similar functions, but be completely different, topographically speaking. Kang outlined some of the mistakes and biases that affect how good we human beings are as observers, and he also talks about how accurate machines are versus humans, indirect versus direct measurement, and different measurement and recording techniques. Some of the diagrams in this handbook are really helpful in this chapter when comparing different time sampling data collection methods. So they have some great flowcharts. I'd really recommend checking it out to determine what method suits your purposes best when you're studying behavior. This chapter gives some really great techniques of observation, and in order to reach those conclusions, they include some flowcharts to determine if frequency or interval recording is best, for example. So I could see a lot of researchers and practitioners using this. It could be very impactful because it not only includes some go-to tools, but it also outlines some of the advantages and drawbacks of people versus machines. Anyone conducting observations, whether it's a student, researcher, or ABA clinician, could potentially use these as references. Our third publication that I'm going to look at is Functional Analysis and Treatment of Inappropriate Sexual Behavior. Kang is the secondary author on this. It was a study conducted on a 9-year-old boy with traumatic brain injury and seizure disorder. His inappropriate sexual behavior was apparently being inadvertently reinforced with social attention. So using functional communication and extinction, they were able to reduce the problem behavior. And it was so bad initially that it caused his parents to place him in a residential facility because he was gearing that attention towards his sibling. So it was significant and it was life impacting, not just for him, but for his siblings. So in the conclusion, the authors suggest that problem behaviors like ISB make more sense to use functional assessments with because the treatments tend to use less punishment. And since reinforcement was used in the study and it was effective, the conclusion seems to be that reinforcement-based treatment is more impactful than punishment when treating problem behaviors like ISB. Someone can accidentally reinforce a behavior that's really harmful or dangerous with social attachment as a positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement can also be used, like it was in this study, to reduce very extreme behavior. Some of the implications of this study, reinforcement-based treatment is more impactful than punishment when treating problem behaviors. However, this is with the very important caveat that they took baseline data and determined the function of the behavior and what reinforcement he was receiving that was augmenting his behavior. This has a lot of impact on basic behavioral analytical knowledge and effective clinical practice because it emphasizes a focus on the importance of functional behavior assessments to adequately inform treatment choice. Kang and his co-authors also showed that behaviorism can be used effectively to address behaviors like ISB that are sometimes treated as biological issues. So he shows in this study that supposedly physiologically based issues can be treated with behaviorism. Our fourth publication is called A Method for Identifying Satiation versus Extinction under Non-Contingent Reinforcement Schedules. So this study tries to see if a reduction in responses from a person being treated with non-contingent reinforcement can be attributed to satiation or extinction. So there were 3 people with developmental disabilities in this study. They either hurt themselves or were aggressive towards others. And when non-contingent reinforcement was tailored to treat them individually, the authors thought satiation would lead to an initial increase in responding from the individuals. They said, in contrast to this, extinction during NCR should not be characterized by the same increase in response during the extinction period because the contingency for the self-injury or aggression would remain unchanged. The authors concluded that when using NCR, the behavior is being reinforced frequently and can lead to satiation and change the motivating operation. So since the schedule doesn't depend on the responses, extinction might occur. And as NCR schedules are thinned, those factors may change. Oh, I'm sorry. So some of the implications of this are that basic behavior analytical knowledge could be affected because it tells the difference between satiation and extinction effects, and it also calls into question the effectiveness of NCR in some cases. Our fourth publication here is called Correspondence Between Outcomes of Brief and Extended Functional Analyses. This article looks at 50 sets of functional assessments, for individuals who were self-injuring. So quick functional assessments were in agreement with the longer and more extensive ones, only in 66 to 68% of the assessments the authors looked at. Apparently the brief assessments ID'd a lot of true and false negatives and positives, which could really affect the conclusions they drew and the treatment choices that they chose. So if you're basing your treatment decisions on what the function of behavior is, and you're only looking at the brief functional assessments, the data might really be skewed. Even though brief FBAs have gained in popularity a lot, especially where time is an issue, this study makes me question if we should really be looking at them as a tool for determining treatment choices. Here are some questions that I'd really like to ask Dr. Khan. So initially, what drew you to behaviorism, and what made you want to focus on ABA and autism in particular? What are some of the more important developments since you've entered the field? How do you think COVID-19 has affected the individuals you teach, study, and publish for? And what can researchers and practitioners do to combat some of these setbacks? How do you predict ABA will change in the next 10 years? And how has your understanding of ABA changed since you first became involved in the field of behaviorism? So why is he important to the field? He's made numerous contributions to the field and still has some studies and publications in press, so he's continuing to contribute. He won the 2003 B.F. Skinner Award for New Researcher, and his work impacts basic behavioral analytical knowledge, but it also has implications for clinical practice, since his focus is on making ABA more effective and on conducting quantitative analyses of behaviorism studies to check some of the mechanisms of ABA and see what's effective and what we need to change. So here's what you can use, practical tools. I would use his flowcharts contained in his chapter of the handbook as day-to-day tools as a beginning behavior analyst. His constant questioning of the minutiae of ABA and his focus on conducting FBAs before deciding a course of treatment and ensuring that those are accurately and effectively done are all things that should shape the way that we view our practice or research. A sense of scientific inquiry of the field itself is maybe the most valuable thing that I gleaned from his work, because it asks all the important questions. Is what we're doing actually helping, and how can we make it more effective? This sort of introspection as a behaviorism community is really important, because it's how we show that we're not above examining our own methodology and making it more effective. Here are the sources that I used for this presentation. Thank you for listening, and I can't wait to hear your feedback.